An overlooked girl's medallion leads to a stunning courtroom revelation. The fluorescent lights of the high school auditorium flickered overhead, casting a sterile glare on the polished wood floor and the anxious faces gathered for the final presentations. Amani stood at the front, clutching the cardboard backing of her meticulously crafted project. Her braided hair felt heavy against her neck, sweat prickling her forehead as the murmur of classmates swelled into a low buzz around her. The sharp scent of aged paper and acrid cleaning supplies mingled in the air, mingling with the faint hum of buzzing fluorescent tubes above. The projector light cut through the dimness, casting a cold glow on the screen behind her as she prepared to present. Just as she opened her mouth, the room shattered not with applause but with a cruel, sharp slash of derision. Derek, a tall boy with a smirk carved from privilege, stepped forward with laughter rolling off him like poison rain. His voice sliced the tension, sinking into the gut of every silent witness. "What a joke," he sneered, reaching out to grip the edge of her project. In one sharp movement, the cardboard gave way, the carefully glued charts and pictures catching air before tumbling to the floor like discarded leaves. The stifled gasps transformed into embarrassed chuckles, eyes darting away to avoid the sting of witness. Amani's throat tightened, her voice caught in a choke as she struggled to find footing amid the collision of humiliation and disbelief. Her fingers twitched at the strap of her medallion hidden beneath her jacket, the medallion that bore her grandmother's strength, gleaming faintly against her skin. Derek's smirk widened, his entourage snickering behind him. "Guess history doesn't interest everyone," he said, voice dripping with condescension. Her heart pounded, each heartbeat a thunderclap in the sudden heavy silence that engulfed her. The murmur of the crowd twisted around her like smoke, curious, wary, and silent. For a moment, she felt the entire weight of the room's gazia, public scrutiny merciless in its judgment. The spotlight that once promised recognition now burned with uncomfortable heat and exposure. Her breath hitched as a single tear traced a line down her cheek, catching the light like a prism shattering the dark. The cold plastic of the medallion under her fingers grounded her, a fragile tether to her inner strength she had barely begun to understand. The camera swept around, capturing the fractured project sprawled across the floor, the whispered indignation, and the raw vulnerability set stark against the sterile, watchful faces of her classmates. Outside, the autumn wind stirred the brittle leaves, a melancholic rhythm echoing the shattering inside the auditorium. Her gaze lifted, eyes shimmering with a quiet defiance barely born, the promise of a hidden fire stoked beneath the snow of rejection. And in that suspended breath, the story paused, caught between fracture and the first fragile flicker of courage. The heavy oak door of Amani's bedroom closed silently behind her, muffling the distant echoes of laughter and whispered judgments that still rang sharp in her ears. In the dim, muted light spilled from the moon through thin curtains, her room was a sacred refuge, a space held between fragility and solace. The soft rustle of the sheets beneath the weight of her slipping frame was the only sound except for her ragged breathing, a slow rhythm that struggled to still the storm raging within. Fingers trembling, she reached beneath her shirt to clasp the cool metal of her grandmother's medallion. Its smooth surface, though worn with age, radiated a quiet warmth against her palm, a silent whisper of strength buried deep in her bloodline, a tether to a woman whose struggles mirrored her own. She closed her eyes, the sharp sting of humiliation still fresh but softened by the familiar comfort of history and resilience. The sterile white walls around her felt both confining and protective, as if the space itself held its breath alongside her. The scattered rays of moonlight painted broken patterns on her skin, fractured shards of light mirrored the fracture within her soul. Her reflection in the cracked mirror on the dresser stared back with a muted defiance she scarcely recognized, a face carved by both pain and unyielding spirit. Her mind replayed the scene earlier, the sudden destruction of her project by Derek, his smirk dripping arrogance, the sting of eyes turned away unwilling to confront the injustice. There was a heaviness in her chest, a swelling tide of anger and despair mingling with a well-hidden spark of resistance. She swallowed hard, swallowing the lump of rage that threatened to erupt, squeezing the medallion tighter as if anchoring herself to the legacy of resilience that it represented. The uniform hush was shattered by the faint creak of the floorboards outside, and Amani stiffened, heart-quickening. But it was only the familiar sound of her younger brother shifting in his sleep down the hall, a reminder of the world that moved on beyond her immediate pain, indifferent yet demanding. A bitter knot of solitude twisted tighter, but in the depths of it, a fragile flame flickered. Beneath the shroud of shame, beneath the layers of rejection, there was a nascent resolve, subtle and uncertain, yet undeniably present. The medallion's steady pulse matched the growing rhythm of defiance echoing silently in her veins. Her breath slowed, a tentative breath drawn from a deep well of inherited courage she'd barely begun to comprehend. The room softened around her, the harsh angles blurred by the misted window, the cold air touched now by a hint of warmth as if the night itself was yielding to the first whisper of change. The camera lingered close, capturing the harmonic tension in her clenched jaw, the subtle spark that danced in her eyes, the gentle cradle of the medallion, a symbol of strength folded within vulnerability. Outside, the world remained unaware of the battles waged beneath flickering bedroom light, the quiet rebellions born in silence. A single shadow passed near the window, momentary and fleeting, a portent of the unseen forces both threatening and shaping her journey. And in that fragile silence, Amani's story held, suspended like the delicate balance before a flame bursts anew, a flicker of hope, veiled and waiting to ignite. The midnight hour clung like mist around Amani's small room, shadows pooling thick beneath her bed and seeping into the crevices of familiar corners. The faint hum of distant city life, muffled and far away, wove through the quiet air, a world moving onward, unaware of the storm within her walls. She sat cross-legged on the worn carpeted floor, her fingers trembling as they brushed away dust from the brittle, time-worn cover of an old diary, its faded leather cracked like the history it held. The room was clawed with slivers of pale moonlight slicing through the blinds, casting sharp, silver-edged patterns on her face and on the pages that now beckoned with whispered secrets. Each breath she took was a fragile thread winding between the past and present, between the shame that strangled her heart and the flicker of hope stammering to life. Her grandmother's handwriting danced across the pages, elegant, deliberate stories embedded in ink, tales of struggle and resilience, of battles fought not on loud stages but in silent rooms where the truth burned as fiercely as any fire. Amani's pulse quickened with each turned page, the words wrapping around her like a healing balm and a call to arms. There, nestled among the faded lines, lay hints of a hidden strength, a legacy of courage passed down as subtly and securely as the medallion she always wore close to her skin. In the flickering glow of a bedside lamp, her eyes traced her grandmother's reflections on facing the world's harshness with undimmed spirit, on seeking justice where the system had blindfolded blinders over fairness. It was a mirror perfectly aligned with her own fractured experience, and yet, in these parallel truths, Amani sensed a powerful undercurrent of possibility. A tear slipped free, trailing warm down her cheek, not from despair but from a sudden surge of fierce belonging, a recognition that her narrative was not yet written and that within her, like within this diary, burned a resilient fire. Her hands closed around the medallion, cold and heavy, yet alive with symbolism, and she pressed it to her heart. The sharp edges of its metal whispered of generations who had walked this road, who had faced the shadows and emerged marked with quiet, uncompromising strength. The room exhaled with a breath she did not fully realize she'd been holding, and in the widening circle of light and shadow, Amani rose, the ghost of a smile flickering against her lips, fragile, tentative, and yet undeniably present. From the window, the city skyline stretched a jagged silhouette against the deep indigo sky, a tapestry threaded with flickers of illumination, promise glowing in the darkest of places. As dawn crept toward the edge of night, Amani's gaze lifted beyond her room, beyond the whispers, the judgments, the battles yet to come, toward the faint yet unyielding spark kindled by the stories of those who came before her. And in that suspended moment, her journey shifted not toward despair, but into the fierce, illuminating dawn of determination, the quiet stirring of a spirit preparing to rise. The camera lingered on her reflected face, a mosaic of shadows and light, of pain softened by awakening before slowly fading into the soft glow of a new day breaking. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of the school library, casting striped shadows over the piles of books and scattered papers on the table where Amani sat. Her muscles ached from tension, but her eyes burned with a new kind of fire. Across from her, Malik leaned in, his voice low yet determined as he pointed to notes she had painstakingly collected. "This is more than just stuff for your project," Malik said quietly. "It's proof evidence that what you're fighting isn't just personal. It's systemic." Amani nodded, her fingers tightening around her grandmother's medallion hanging beneath her shirt, a cool anchor pulsing with memories and strength. Outside, distant laughter and the murmur of students drifting down the hall fractured the stillness, an ever-present reminder of the watchful eyes and whispered judgments hung like shadows. The library, with its towering shelves and faint scent of musty paper and lemon polish, felt like a sanctuary now, a refuge away from the spotlight that had so recently burned her. But the weight of knowing was heavy. Each fact uncovered, every piece of dialogue logged, brought her deeper into a struggle that felt both larger than herself and all too personal. Across the room, Ms. Harris approached quietly, her expression a mix of sympathy and steely resolve. "You're not alone in this, Amani," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure your voice is heard." Amani glanced up, gratitude flickering in her eyes but quickly shadowed by the lingering doubt, the fear of retaliation, the consequences she might face for standing against Derek's unrelenting hostility. The door creaked ajar, and a shadow crossed the threshold, stirring the tension in the space like a sudden gust. A respected teacher's gaze met hers with a flicker of warning, a silent message that the battle had begun beyond these walls too. Later, as heavy clouds gathered outside and raindrops began tapping in a gradual symphony against the library window, Amani sat alone, tracing the edges of the medallion. Thunder rumbled distantly, mirroring the turmoil in her chest. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from Malik, "Meet me after school. We've got to talk." Amani's breath caught, hope and apprehension clashing like the storm brewing beyond. She stood, casting one last glance at her notes, clutching the medallion close, a solitary warrior stepping toward uncertain battles. The camera held on Amani's determined face, framed by the dim, diffused light, the contrast sharpening as the rain cast reflections on the polished floor, a mirrored dance of shadow and resolve. The scene faded into the unfolding storm outside, the first step of a delicate fight that would tread the thin line between courage and consequence. The school corridors were a whirlwind of motion and muted tension, the echo of lockers slamming and hurried footsteps fracturing the uneasy calm that had settled since the first ripples of confrontation. Amani navigated the labyrinth of hallways with a guarded determination, the weight of her grandmother's medallion heavy against her skin, a tangible reminder of the lineage of strength she still barely understood but fiercely clung to. Malik's steady presence beside her was reassuring, but beneath his calm exterior, Amani sensed an undercurrent of worry. Their alliance had weathered the initial storm, but each step forward seemed to stir the underbelly of resistance more venomously. The air was thick with whispered suspicions from peers, eyes darting away when Amani passed, and the starkness of institutional skepticism. "Are you sure about this?" Malik's voice was low, a mix of concern and resolve as they moved into a secluded corner of the school's battered gymnasium. "I have to be," Amani replied, her voice steady despite the knot twisting her stomach. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us who get pushed down and silenced." Their small victories were punctuated by piercing setbacks. Word spread rapidly. Supposed friends began to keep their distance, their smiles frostbitten with hidden agendas. One confidant, whom Amani had shared pieces of her grandmother's diary and her growing fight with, turned cold, leaving whispered rumors in her wake, poisoning allies into spectators. The betrayal stung sharply. Amani's heart clenched in her chest, the medallion became an anchor for her faltering resolve. She spent restless nights replaying the trust she had extended, now cracked and fractured like the cold glass on her bedroom window, the world outside blurring into shadows and muted reflections. Yet, amid the encroaching darkness, moments of light pierced through. Ms. Harris, her teacher, became a steadfast ally, offering a rare warmth in a terrain that seemed unyielding and hostile. Her presence reminded Amani that support existed within the institution's walls, quiet but potent. Outside school, the weight of her burden pressed heavier as calls from Derek's father surfaced, warnings laced with veiled threats and a stark escalation that sent chills down her spine. The system was guarded fiercely by those who benefited from its silence, and now the stakes were higher than ever. One afternoon, beneath a sky heavy with brooding clouds that threatened rain, Amani stumbled upon a torn note slipped beneath her locker door, simple words written hastily. Trust no one fully. Not even those closest. Her breath caught as a shiver raced down her spine. The fragility of her circle became painfully clear, the fight less a journey of allies and more a solitary path fraught with shadows. Yet, in her heart, the medallion pulsated a steady, defiant beat against the encroaching silence. The camera caught the shimmering in her eyes, flickering between fear and unyielding tenacity, framed by the cold, twisting halls that held echoes of past battles and future conflicts. Across her face played the fleeting grace of a half-smile, delicate declaration that despite the weight, her spirit would not break. As the final bell rang a piercing, resonant note through the subdued building, Amani stepped into the crowded hallway, surrounded by a sea of faces both curious and guarded. The storm inside her calmed just enough to steady her pace, but the storm around her crackled with a tension unresolved. The scene faded slowly, the bustle of students becoming a distant roar, and the camera closed on Amani's clenched fist where the medallion rested, the emblem of hidden strength and hope against a backdrop of uncertainty and rising peril. The muted buzz of the school corridors faded into a sharp silence as Amani retreated into the dimly lit sanctuary of the library's forgotten corner. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and whispered secrets, the sharp contrast to the relentless pressure building outside. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the brittle, yellowed pages of an old courtroom ledger, her grandmother's name etched within, a poignant echo from a past she had barely dared to imagine. Her breath caught in a breathless mix of reverence and disbelief. Each line unveiled a narrative tangled with prejudice, injustice, and relentless courage, the very struggles reverberating in her own life's fractured mirror. The ledger spoke not only of silent battles fought behind sterile walls of justice but of a woman who had faced the suffocating weight of systemic inequity and emerged marked by both scars and unyielding resolve. The subdued glow of the desk lamp illuminated Amani's face, casting a chiaroscuro of shadows that danced along the contours of her eyes, windows coloring with a mix of sorrow and newfound strength. The medallion against her skin seemed to pulse gently, a heartbeat of connection bridging generational resilience. Suddenly, the quiet was ruptured by hushed footsteps. Her heart jolted, the specter of betrayal materialized before her. A sharp whisper at the edge of her senses, a rustle of movement too deliberate. Malik's trusting face faltered when a cold voice interrupted, unveiling that supposed allies could be masked threats. "You trust too easily," the betrayed confidant hissed, eyes flashing with conflicted loyalty and fear. The weight of isolation wrapped tighter around Amani's shoulders, the sting of deception cutting deeper than any physical blow. Broken briefly but never defeated, she swallowed the rising tide of despair. Her fingers closed tighter around the medallion, a talisman reinforcing the silent vow she made that night beneath the flickering light. A distant knock sounded at the library door, a messenger bearing an envelope, its seal stamped with a familiar insignia. The contents could shift the fragile balance, upending plans carefully laid by those thirsty for control. Amani hesitated, the room seemed to breathe with tension as she broke the seal. Inside lay a note, words simple yet seismic: "The past is not buried. The fight is not over. Her gaze lifted slowly to meet the towering stacks of books surrounding her, the silent sentinels that held countless histories, secrets, and truths waiting to be wielded. The camera held tight on Amani's face, a storm of emotions swirling behind steady eyes, a fractured smile breaking through the shadows of doubt. The school corridors beyond whispered on, a lingering echo of footsteps both past and future, carrying her toward the precipice of an irrevocable choice to confront the darkness with the light of truth or surrender to the shadows that sought to consume her. As rain pattered softly against the windowpane, the scene faded to black, the faint cadence of unfolding courage a heartbeat away from eruption. The rain hammered relentlessly against the windowpane of Amani's cramped bedroom, a cold, insistent drumming that matched the pounding inside her chest. The room was bathed in the dim gray light of a dull, overcast afternoon, shadows pooling thickly in every corner. A flickering candle on the cluttered desk cast trembling light on the scattered papers and the fractured glass of her phone screen, a symbol of everything breaking apart around her. She sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly around the familiar weight of her grandmother's medallion. The cool metal bit against her clammy skin, offering a fragile thread back to a strength she barely felt she could reach now. Her gaze was distant, pinned to the harsh reality reflected in the shard of glass, a world distorted, splintered. Outside, the muffled sounds of the school buzzed faintly in the distance, the distant announcements, the random laughter of passing students, but none of it felt connected to her anymore. The betrayal was suffocating. Malik's sudden withdrawal had left an echoing void, and Ms. Harris' concerned whispers now seemed a fragile lifeline slipping through clenched fingers. Across the school, she had been suspended, silenced under the weight of accusations and manipulated narratives. The courtroom records she'd uncovered were haunting reminders that history's judgment was often skewed by hands more powerful and less just. Her sanctuary of truth was now a battleground strewn with isolation and distrust. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, memories flashing violently, the cruel smirk on Derek's lips, the mocking silence when she tried to speak, the cold glance of authority turning away from her pleas. The heavy fog of despair wrapped around her, chilling and deep. Amani's voice barely rose, a hollow whisper to the empty room. What's left when the fight costs everything? The candle guttered, a final flicker amid the encroaching dark. Her eyes shifted to the corner of the room where the medallion rested quietly against her worn jacket, a quiet emblem of endurance and hidden power. Yet even that symbol now felt distant, shrouded beneath the heaviness of loss. The storm outside surged, wind howling through the cracked window frame, the relentless rain erasing the world beyond as if wiping away hope itself. The walls seemed to close in, the silence so complete it drowned her thoughts. Amani curled inward, the weight of isolation pressing hard. The bright promise of justice and vindication had dimmed to a faint flicker, nearly extinguished. The camera lingered on her solitary form, framed by shadows and the flickering candlelight, a fragile figure cast against the vast encroaching darkness of a world seemingly determined to break her. And in that vast, suffocating silence, the story held its breath, on the edge of unraveling, on the cusp of a descent that threatened to consume everything she'd held dear. The night was a heavy cloak, smothering the school grounds and pressing against the cracked windows of Amani's room. The air was stale, touched by the crisp chill of a looming winter, slicing through the cracked seams of the old house like a ghostly whisper. Inside, Amani curled into the corner of her bed, the thin blanket wrapping her but failing to shield her from the desolation that seeped through her bones. Her breaths came shallow, fragments of quiet sobs swallowed in the pressing silence. The medallion lay cold against her chest, a weight that should have anchored her, yet now felt like a chain tethering her to the endless void of disappointment and fear. The familiar metallic touch was her grandmother's legacy, a whispered promise she no longer felt entitled to. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, blurring the tired outline of vicious emotion, betrayal, shame, exhaustion, each a hammer striking down the fragile walls of hope she'd built. The laughter she saw in the daylight when Derek destroyed her project transformed in the darkness to a piercing anthem of isolation, echoing through the empty school halls like the fading pulse of a forgotten heartbeat. Her eyes fluttered closed, and in the oppressive silence, every sound became monumental: the creak of the old floorboards groaning beneath the night's weight, the distant bark of a dog, a lone car passing outside in a world that felt far removed from her own. She reached up, fingers trembling as they brushed the medallion's cool surface, tracing the delicate engraving worn smooth by time. It was a flicker of light in the void, a silent reminder that beneath the bruises of injustice, something fierce still lived. Yet even this beacon seemed distant, drowning in the tide of loneliness that crashed over her spirit. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sigh of the world turning, indifferent to the battle raging beneath its steady march. Amani's thoughts tangled in endless loops, questions unanswered, alliances fractured, dreams deferred. The isolation wasn't just social. It was a gnawing certainty that the fight might consume everything she held dear. Her whispered breath broke the stillness, a fragile admission hung in the darkness. What's left when everything's gone? The room held its breath, the shadows crept closer, and Amani lay still, suspended at the edge of surrender. The medallion's faint glimmer was swallowed by the night as silence reclaimed its hold. The camera pulled away slowly, capturing the fragile form bathed in moonlight's cool embrace. The silence grew, profound and complete, until the screen faded to black, leaving only the echo of a heart poised on the brink of giving up. Night had settled like a thick, suffocating shroud over the cemetery grounds, where rows of headstones stood solemn and silent beneath a sky stripped bare of stars. Amani moved slowly along the narrow pathways, clutching her grandmother's tarnished medallion close to her chest as if it might shield her from the chill creeping through her bones. The heavy air bore the faint scent of jasmine, an echo from the past mingling with the cold present. Ahead, the modest grave stood bathed in the pale, spectral light of a flickering lantern someone had left. Relief mixed with sorrow softened Amani's steps as she approached, sinking to her knees in the cold earth. Her fingers trembled as they reached out to brush a withered flower resting upon the stone, a fragile bloom clinging to memory. Her voice, barely more than a breath, cracked the silence. "Grandma, I don't think I can do this." Tears spilled freely, tracing trails down her cheeks as the weight of exhaustion and despair pressed down with relentless force. The weeks of betrayal, isolation, and mounting battles had worn her thin. Every scar felt fresh, every hurt amplified in the endless night. In the stillness, a soft rustling caught her attention. The worn diary she had recently discovered slipped between the pages of her jacket. Her fingers found its familiar cover and she opened it with reverence, the yellowed pages seeming to glow faintly in the lantern's light. A passage stood out, scrawled in her grandmother's determined hand. "Within every shadow lies a flame that never dies. Courage, once found, cannot be undone." The words settled over Amani like a whisper of dawn. Her breath slowed, the rhythm of hope returning as she clasped the medallion tighter. The flame, modest yet persistent, flickered stubbornly within her heart. She looked up toward the sky where clouds began to part, revealing a single, blinding star shimmering defiantly against the dark. It was a celestial beacon, a silent promise that even in the deepest darkness, light endures. The camera held on her face a portrait etched with both pain and resolve as she rose from the ground, unsteady but undeterred. The grave, the medallion, the diary all formed a sacred triad of strength, memory, and awakening. Her final, whispered words hovered in the cold night air, "I'm not finished yet." The scene faded slowly, the lantern's glow dimming into the gentle light of pre-dawn, leaving behind the fragile but unwavering spark of a woman ready to reclaim her truth and fight for justice anew. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting long, soft stripes across Amani's bedroom floor. Shadows that had clung tightly to the corners of the room during her darkest hours slowly began to retreat, giving way to a gentle warmth that seeped into the stillness. Amani sat on the edge of her bed, the faint hum of birdsong drifting through the open window, a tender soundtrack that felt both foreign and faintly hopeful. Her fingers clutched the medallion resting against her chest, the cold metal a cool contrast to the warmth blooming within her. The weight of the past weeks, heavy and suffocating, started loosening its hold, replaced by a pulsing rhythm of something new, resilience. The diary, its pages worn but filled with her grandmother's steady script, lay open on the bedside table like a compass pointing toward uncharted territory. A quiet peace settled over the room, ruptured only by the soft rustling of pages as Amani traced the lines of her grandmother's words once more. Talk of strength born in silence, courage forged in adversity, and a relentless pursuit of justice whispered softly from the parchment, kindling embers within her spirit. Her gaze lifted to the mirror across the room, catching her reflection, a young woman still bearing the shadows of hurt but now illumined with a flicker of determination. The line of her jaw was steadier, her eyes brighter, the first glimmer of defiance shimmering just beneath the surface. Outside, the world was waking in hesitant color, the dull gray of despair edged with strokes of gold and pale blue. Amani rose slowly, each movement deliberate as though reclaiming limbs weighed by countless battles. The morning was fragile but alive, a reminder that even the darkest nights must yield to dawn. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, broke the sacred silence. "I'm not done yet." The medallion caught the light as she stood, its gentle gleam a quiet symbol of unbroken lineage and unseen strength. It was the first light in a long, dark tunnel, the fragile beginning of a climb back toward justice. The camera lingered on her silhouette framed by the open window, the curtains billowing softly as if carrying away the heaviness that once shadowed her heart. The outside world spread vast and uncertain, but in that moment, Amani's resolve settled into something steel-clad and enduring. Her breath deepened with hope, a vow whispered into the morning air, a solemn promise to face the storms ahead with a courage drawn from the roots of her heritage. The scene held in this delicate balance of light and shadow, the birthplace of transformation, untested but undeniable, fragile but fiercely alive. The beat of the medallion echoed beneath the swell of the soundtrack, a steady pulse heralding the first steps toward redemption and the long path of justice awaiting her. The solemnity of the courtroom was punctuated by a heavy silence that clung to every surface, the muted buzz of spectators settling, the firm rustle of papers, the distant faint hum of city life beyond barred windows. Amani's heartbeat thrummed steadily beneath her breast, each pulse a rhythmic defiance against the storm that had once threatened to swallow her whole. Her tall frame, draped in modest yet resolute attire, radiated a quiet strength as she took the floor, the medallion nestled against her skin, a steady reminder of battles fought and courage inherited. Across the room, Derek's smirk was replaced by a flicker of unease. The privileged arrogance that once shielded him now cracked under the unwavering gaze of justice. His father's lawyer, sharp-eyed and poised, prepared to dismantle her case with practiced coldness, yet Amani stood undeterred, the shadows of doubt giving way to light growing ever brighter within. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the tension, a young warrior armed with truth and an ancestral legacy. "This isn't just about me," she declared, her words resonating with the weight of generations. "It's about exposing the injustice that breeds silence and fear in halls like these." The courtroom fell into a breathless pause as she recounted the myriad assaults, not merely physical, but institutional and whispered threats that had sought to diminish her. Each detail was woven with a delicate blend of pain and unwavering resolve, a tapestry crafted in the crucible of lived experience. Malik sat among the attendees, silent support etched clearly in his eyes, while Ms. Harris' subtle nod offered a warm contrast to the sterile coldness of the legal battleground. The glow of a single overhead lamp pooled over Amani's shoulders, haloing her in fragile but potent light. Suddenly, a witness took the stand, an unexpected ally who stepped forward with a testimony that sliced through the tangled web of deceit. Their voice was firm, a declaration that exposed the cracks in Derek's fortress of lies and entitlement. The air shifted, the weight of truth beginning to tip the scales toward justice. Amani held her breath as the courtroom felt the tremors of change, fear replaced by resolve, shadows pierced by the growing blaze of light. She glanced down at her medallion, its cool surface grounding her amidst the storm of emotions, reminding her that the fight was not hers alone, but one carried across generations. When the session adjourned for a brief recess, Amani stepped into a corridor bathed in the golden glow of afternoon sunlight filtering through tall windows. The stark contrast of light and shadow carved sharp lines across the floor, a mirrored metaphor for the contrasts within her own journey, the fragility of hope and the strength born from struggle. Her lips parted slightly, a whisper to no one but herself, "This is just the beginning." The camera pulled back slowly, capturing the quiet power in her stance, the intricate dance of resilience and vulnerability entwined in her every movement. As the sunlight kissed the medallion's gleam, it became more than a keepsake, it was a beacon, lighting the path forward toward a justice long overdue. The scene faded not in resolution, but in poised anticipation, a story balanced on the cusp of triumph and challenge, where the courage to confront darkness illuminated a fragile, fiercely burning hope. The courtroom was awash in a heavy light, stark and unforgiving, spilling through the tall windows and painting golden contours across the polished wood and solemn faces. Amani stood in the center of it all, poised, resolute, no longer the girl fractured by the cruel hands of politics and prejudice. The medallion around her neck caught the sun's brilliance, its worn metal shimmering as if alive with the courage of generations past. Silence held the vast chamber captive as the final witness approached the stand, a figure unknown but undeniable in their candor. The words they spoke peeled back invisible layers of deceit, exposing the deeply entrenched injustices carved beneath the school's pristine facade. Each revelation was a beacon cutting through the darkness, illuminating Amani's truth and the collective pain it represented. Derek's facade faltered under the mounting evidence. His father's lawyer, sharp and poised, fought with the ferocity of denial, but the tide was undeniable. The murmurs grew louder, a swell of justice rising with the voices of those who had been silent too long. Amani's gaze lifted, steady and unshakable. "This is not just about one act of cruelty," she said softly, yet every word struck with the weight of conviction. "It is about recognizing the dignity of every person who walks these halls and beyond." The medallion pulsed warmly against her chest, a talisman of inner strength and the silent victories of those who came before her. In the radiant light, it seemed to infuse her with a quiet invincibility. Outside, the sunlight splintered through leaves, casting dancing patterns on the courthouse steps, the world alive with the promise of renewal and reckoning. The school hallway's harsh scrutiny had given way to a community witnessing transformation through courage. The judge's final words echoed with solemn gravity, affirming not only Amani's courage but sending ripples that promised change. Her victory was not just legal, it was moral, symbolic, a beacon in the murky fight against systemic injustice. Her lips curved into a fleeting, yet profound smile, a silent celebration of resilience sealed by justice. The crowd stood, some applauded, others wept, but all felt the shifting tides. The camera pulled back slowly, framing Amani's calm, radiant figure beside the carved emblem of justice that crowned the courtroom's heart. Her story, marked by pain and perseverance, reached its crescendo not with vengeance, but with triumph stitched in grace. The scene faded gently to the soft shimmer of the medallion resting against her skin, glinting with ancestral pride and the glowing light of a hard-won dawn. In that glow, the story pulsated, a living testament to the power of courage, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the quiet strength that invisibly transforms the world. Amani stood poised for whatever lay ahead, the medallion's legacy pulsing steady, a symbol of victory over darkness, an unbreakable bond between past and future. A gentle dawn stretched its pale glow across the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the town and symbolically illuminating the path of healing and new beginnings. Amani sat quietly on the weathered stone of her grandmother's gravestone, her figure softly silhouetted against the emerging light. The medallion, worn, tarnished, yet radiating an unmistakable aura, rested in her palm, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of its surface. The quiet rustling of leaves accompanied her silent reflection, a serene symphony that seemed to echo the understated strength she had cultivated throughout her journey. Her eyes, once haunted by doubt and pain, now shimmered with a gentle resolve. The chaos of her youth, the relentless struggle against systemic injustice, and the betrayals that once fractured her trust all faded into a shadowy backdrop beneath this dawn of understanding. Her posture was calm but purposeful, embodying a quiet dignity earned through resilience. Slowly, she lifted the medallion and pressed it against her heart, feeling the steady, reassuring beat beneath her fingertips, a heartbeat of hope passed from generations that had faced darkness before her. A faint smile touched her lips, delicate yet unmistakably genuine. Her shoulders relaxed, releasing the burdens that had threatened to crush her, and instead welcoming the peace she had fought so fiercely to claim. The wind stirred softly, whispering through the trees, carrying with it an invisible promise that healing takes time, that every step forward is a victory in itself, and that the roots of her strength ran deep into her heritage. She looked out over the rolling fields and distant hills, a landscape vibrant with possibility, alive and waiting for her to embrace it. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing her silhouette against the awakening world, a quiet sentinel of hope, standing at the crossroads of past trauma and future promise. The medallion gleamed subtly in the morning light, a silent testament to the enduring power of inner strength and love. In this peaceful moment, so soft, so imbued with gratitude, Amani's heart felt a gentle acceptance of her path. She understood now that justice, healing, and growth do not happen overnight but are built day by day, moment by moment. Her story was not just about fighting injustice, it was about reclaiming her voice, her worth, and her heritage. The scene held still in a tableau of calm, a visual melody of continuity and hope. The sun rose higher, bathing everything in a tender glow, as if nature herself acknowledged her victory not merely over external forces but over the shadows that once threatened to extinguish her spirit. The medallion remained pressed against her chest, a quiet breathing emblem of renewal, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of her legacy. The soft glow of sunset bathed the cemetery in a gentle, amber hue, enfolding the grave of her grandmother with a tender warmth. Amani, now at peace, knelt quietly beside the headstone, her fingers delicately tracing the smooth surface. The medallion in her hand felt lighter than ever, its worn edges like a silent testament to a journey of pain, resilience, and transformation. Her face was softened, yet resolute, carrying the weight of her tumultuous past with a newfound clarity. Around her, the wind stirred the last leaves, whispering stories of generations who had faced darkness, silent witnesses to history's unyielding struggle against injustice. The quiet was profound, a silence filled with understanding and acceptance. The medallion, once a symbol of hidden strength, now gleamed with a quiet radiance, embodying the power of forgiveness and the acceptance of pain as part of her story. Amani took a slow, trembling breath, letting go of the years of clenched anger and buried fear. She pressed her palm against the cold stone, feeling the steady heartbeat of her ancestors echoing through her fingers. In that fragile moment, she understood that her journey wasn't just about fighting the system but about transforming herself into someone who could stand tall amidst storms and carry the torch of hope for those yet to come. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing her silhouette against the softly setting sun, a figure sculpted by resilience and grace, rooted in her heritage. Her eyes closed briefly, a silent prayer for healing, for reconciliation, for a future built on truth and understanding. The scene lingered in this tableau of gentle acceptance, the medallion resting peacefully in her palm, an eternal symbol of her unbreakable spirit. As the light dimmed into dusk, a profound calm settled over her, a recognition that victory was not merely external but woven into the very fabric of her soul. In the quiet hush of the evening, she finally smiled, a smile of peace, of a past reconciled and a future illuminated by hope. The universe seemed to pause, holding its breath in reverence as she rose slowly, her figure steady and unshakable. With one last glance at her grandmother's grave, she turned, stepping forward into a world forever changed by her journey, no longer a victim but a victor, carrying the silent strength of love, justice, and resilience. The cool dawn cast a serene glow across the quiet cemetery, where the new headstone of her grandmother stood, modest yet regal, a testament to resilience and quiet strength. Amani approached slowly, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her feet blending with the gentle rustle of leaves in the early breeze. She held the medallion, worn and tarnished, cradling it with reverence as if it were a living relic of her journey. Beneath her fingertips, the familiar cold metal warmed against her skin, a reminder of the lineage of perseverance, love, and justice that had shaped her. Her eyes, luminous and calm, reflected a profound understanding, the kind born from years of suffering, rising, and eventual triumph. Her grip tightened around the medallion, a silent pact between her and her ancestors. Faintly, she traced the carved initials on the headstone with her eyes, then softly pressed her hand against it. A silent prayer, a vow to keep their story alive, to carry forward their legacy of strength. The rhythmic beating of her heart echoed with the pulse of the medallion, the symbol of hidden resilience now fully realized. The world around her was still, marked by a gentle silence that spoke volumes. The morning light streamed through the trees, bathing everything in a golden halo, illuminating the path she had walked, the pain, the fight, the unwavering hope. She stepped back, and with a gentle, determined smile, placed the medallion atop her grandmother's grave, an act of continuity, of honoring those who had endured and paved the way. Standing there, she looked out over the tranquil landscape, the sprawling field, the distant horizon, each element whispering a silent promise that her journey was not an end but a new beginning. The medallion shimmered softly in the dawn's light, emblematic of a victory hard-earned and dearly held. As the camera pulled away, capturing her silhouette against the awakening sky, the scene faded into a hush, the lingering echo of resilience and hope. The silence settled deep, a gentle reminder that true peace is often born from the storm, the struggle, and the unwavering belief in justice. And in that silence, her story found its eternal peace embedded in the quiet strength handed down through generations, forever a beacon against the shadows. How would you react in her shoes? Share your thoughts below.